No, a typical air ambulance unit would be 6 aircraft in a detachment of about 65, 70 people, and a company will be 25 aircraft. And you didn't fly, you generally stayed within your own platoon, but each day um, you might be subject to flying with a different co-pilot and a different crew in the aircraft. However, when you're field sighted, which means that your aircraft is being sent to cover a particular area for, say, a week or so, then you're always together in the same team would go out. And when I supported the 22nd, it was a constant team that we went that I had with me at that time. Charles Meyer was my co-pilot, actually aircraft commander. He had been in country longer than I, and we were a team much of the time. Yes, Charles Meyer is a big West Virginia 6-foot boy that, because of his size, I think, and because of his tenacious effort to save me, he pulled me out of an aircraft that was crashed and burning, that that a smaller stature person might not have been able to have been as successful. I owe my life to him, and he knows it, and we communicate that. I'm happy to communicate that with him as often as I can. There was a medic by the name of Small, Specialist Small. When the rocket hit us, he was blown out of the aircraft and landed in a tree with a broken hip. And they found him rather quickly, but he did suffer a broken hip. The crew chief was burned up in the aircraft and unfortunately did not make it out. I visited his, if you will, his name on the wall in Washington, D.C. a number of times. James E. Richardson, Sergeant James Richardson, did not make it out. I guess the thing that stands out about my time there was that I initially was assigned to support the 22nd Surge Hospital as the Medevac aircraft that supported them. And after about 2 weeks of being in that role during a pickup out in the Ashaw Valley, very close to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, I was shot down with an enemy missile. We had received a call about midnight, yes, of a unit of 101st that was in contact. We cranked up and went out to the area. It was a night mission, and it was obvious we were going to have to be a hoist. And a hoist night mission is just the hairiest of all. As we got in the general area, the battalion commander of the 2nd of the 5 Deuce 101st Airborne called us on the radio and said, "Dust off, this is not going to work. They're still in contact. You guys stand by. We'll call you when we can get you in." We went back to Fubai Airport, refueled, and about sunup, we got the call that said, "Wait another hour and come out again." We did, so we flew back to the area. It was daylight, and it was in very thick jungle, triple canopy jungle area, west of a fire base called Bastogne, and in the Ashaw Valley, right where the Ashaw Valley meets the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is running north and south. We knew it was a treacherous area. Gunship support was not available, and we were kind of hovering around looking for the smoke that they had popped, because the smoke would filter up through the trees and let us know that was the right spot. There was no way we could land. We knew it was going to be a hoist mission. Looking for the smoke. And I remember that just as the medic or crew chief said, "Hey, sir, I got yellow smoke over here at 3 o'clock." At that moment, the cockpit went bright white light. At the time, I remember thinking like a nuclear explosion. Everything went perfectly white. We'd been hit by a B-40 missile. The missile hit us in the left rear, severed the tail boom, and the rest of the helicopter then, without a tail boom, began to spin like a top. one of us pilots pulled power out of just reaction of something that's not good happening. And we actually flew like a top for almost a quarter of a mile from where we were hit and crashed down into the valley, even closer to the bad guys, Ho Chi Minh Trail. I was unconscious from the time I saw the white cockpit. My co-pilot, Mike Meyer, climbed out of the wreckage when we went down through the trees, came back and saw me sitting in the other pilot's seat, kicked in the glass with his feet. I made a comment about he's such a big 6-foot heavy boy. And at the time, tells me that he actually patted a fire out on my clothes, unbuckled me. I fell forward. He pulled me out of the aircraft and put me over under a little bush. He went back to see if he could get anybody else out, and the fire was too intense at that point. He didn't know it, but at that time, the crew chief had left the medic had left the aircraft at the point of impact, and was up near where the people we were trying to support was at. Mike was a very calm-natured fellow, and about 3 hours later, somewhere in the afternoon of the 4th of April, 1968, my head was laying on his lap. He was sitting under the same bush he'd put me under, and I looked up at him, and he says, "It's just me and you, Ben." I looked at his face. It was all blistered from where he had come into the fire to pull me out. His hands were blistered. I didn't know it at the time, but I had my left ankle was crushed and shot. I knew that I had the burns. The burns that I could see, I thought were open scrapes, but I knew that I had open wounds of some sort. I couldn't walk. Mike could. Mike was ambulatory, except for the blisters of the burns. And so we decided at that point, he says, "It's just you and I." The aircraft was smoldering at that point, and we decided to just stay right there, hoping that someone would come and find us. That evening passed, and with no sleep, of course, we had no food, no water. I remember I had a .38 pistol on my hip, and that was it. Mike and I made a pact that we wouldn't identify ourselves when somebody might call out in the distance until we could see that they were Americans, because we could hear trucks and stuff moving all around where we were, which is in fact in the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They were enemy vehicles. And so we decided we'll wait to see people before we let them know who we are. But we retained a low profile and, if you will, evaded, and stayed low under the bushes all the time. I remember perhaps the second night, wild hogs were around where we were at, scared to live in hell. I forget, it's all over. We're done. We're going to be captured. Because I could hear their noise, and there was bushes moving closely. I actually drew my pistol and thought, this is it. But Mike told me later, those were pigs. There were wild pigs that were near us, and they just moved on. We thought about the fact that we'll go up the hill. I could crawl, he could walk, and maybe someone would find us at the top of the hill. Got about halfway up the hill, maybe on the second or third day, and looked at each other and said, "This is pretty dumb. They're going to go where the aircraft wreckage is." So we turned around and crawled back down the hill. We never found the wreckage again, though. We got back to the area somewhere. At this point, I was pretty delirious. And I told Mike, I says, to his credit, I said, "Mike, why don't you go on? And I'll stay here. You bring somebody back." I knew that I couldn't cover the turf and the terrain. He could. And to his credit, bless his heart, he said, no, we're a team. I'm with you. We're going to stay together. Finally, off in the distance, little did we know, but a special rescue team had been put together. They yelled out, there was a yell out in the distance, "Hey, dust off. Hey, dust off." we had already decided we would not react to that. But by that point in time, both of us raised our arms, yelled out, says, "Oh yeah, we're over here, we're over here." And then we looked at each other like, "Oh geez, did we do it right?" And lo and behold, it was a special team. The rescue team was had been when the day we crashed. There was an immediate request up the chain to let's go see if we can find there any survivors. It was in a hot area, and General Barsanti was the CG of the 101st Airborne at the time. He said, "No, no, no, we can't afford to send anybody in there yet." A lieutenant from 2nd of the 50 Deuce, 101st Airborne, named Tim Lickness, Lickness, said to his captain, "Let me take a team and go see. I know basically where they are." And lo and behold, as I understand it from Tim, it was a 5-man group. He had a couple all infantrymen, 1 medic, so 4 shooters and the medic. They actually had a firefight with enemy troops getting to where we were. I don't know much about that. Tim could probably share more on that. And when they found us, they had to bring us back over the ridge, the hills, to where their small company remnants were still. I remember that I hadn't had anything to eat or drink in a while, and the medic had a can of sea ration apricots in his backpack. I don't like apricots at all, but it was really a moment that stood out. I remember that. And I was shell-shocked, very PTS, and he let me have his helmet. And I remember that was what a nice gesture. He gave me the helmet because there were mortars and stuff happening all around us at the time. We spent that night with their organization, probably of about, I'm going to guess, about 50 soldiers at a hilltop. The next day, we had been, now meanwhile, my wife and family and parents had all been sent messages that, effective 24 hours after you're gone, I was declared missing in action. Telegrams went out to that effect, sorry to report that the following individual is missing in action, and so on. They still couldn't get in to get us out, so it was a hoist mission, and they blew trees with C4 compound so that helicopter could hide down inside the trees but not land. And on the day we were lifted out, there were 16 people moved out of the same hilltop, lifted out on hoist. My company commander from my unit that had been 100 miles away flew in to be a part of the effort. I don't recall what lift I went out on. I don't know if it was the first. It might have been. And we loaded 3 or 4 of us on the hoist, brought up. And I knew we were going to the 22nd Surge, which is the unit that I had been working with. I think the 22nd had been advised that quite a number's coming. And oh, by the way, we found your Medevac crew, and they're part of what's coming in. The 22nd knew we were coming, and it was kind of nice. A number of the organization met the aircraft at the pad. From that point on, my treatment of the 22nd was kind of shaky and foggy. I remember that I was very dry, very emaciated, had no fluids for a while. I remember the unit said, another day without fluids, you'd be on a different table than ours. And once fluids were started, I slept, immediately went to sleep. And the next day, my mother unit asked to take both Mike and I back closer to Quignon. So I flew back to Quignon the next day, was put in the 85th hospital for maybe, the triage at that point was we just casted my leg because they knew they couldn't do much with it, weren't sure they were even going to save it, and began treating me for the burns. I spent a day or two in Quinlan, then flew over to Clark Air Base in the Philippines, staging unit. I think I spent overnight at Clark, and I was staged for a burn flight to Japan, to the 106 hospital in Japan. Went to the burn unit in Japan, stayed maybe a week or 10 days, and then was evacuated on to the burn unit at Fort Sam Houston, Brooke Army Hospital. Mike actually came with me to the 106 and with the flight back home to San Antonio. Mike's injury, his burns were healing, but they since we were manifested together, he came back with me. At some point when I was in the hospital at Brooke Hospital, a young Army clerk arrived at my bedside one morning with a briefcase in his hand and said, introduced himself, and he said, "I'm here to survey you out of the Army." I said, no, you don't understand this. I don't want to get out of the Army. He says, "Oh, sir," he says, "I don't think you're going to be able to stay." He says, "It's my orders here." He showed me some paperwork. He says, "We're going to process you." I said, "You go find somebody with more rank than you." I says, I'm not getting out of the Army. And lo and behold, I went all the way up to a brigadier general by the name of Hamrick. And I told him, I said, "Sir, I don't want to get out. I got no place else to be." He said, "Well, you're going to have a profile. You're going to have some run." I said, "It's okay. I want to stay." Lo and behold, we processed the paper. And I says, "And by the way, I want to fly helicopters too." He said, "Oh, no, it is going to happen." I said, "Well," so they processed paperwork to stay in the Army. And I went through a recovery period. I was 9 months at the hospital in San Antonio. I went through a period with therapy to try to fix my leg. And I had been through, had some skin graft work done, so that my time on the burn ward was several months. And I petitioned to get back on flight status. And I was told, it's pretty far-fetched. That's not going to happen. But I said, "What do I have to do?" And so they outlined what my procedures were. And I'm telling you this story because it gets to a good piece of the story. Finally, I was approved to take a test flight with an instructor pilot and a flight surgeon to see if I could return to flight status. I had studied like I did back in flight school, and I had everything down pat. But I knew that there's one maneuver in the Huey helicopter called hydraulics off, where you take the hydraulics assists to the controls and turn them off. I didn't have strength in my left leg to push the left pedal that would be necessary in that maneuver. I knew it. I didn't say anything. Figured, well, maybe they won't ask me to do that maneuver. Lo and behold, the day came, and I was assigned an instructor pilot by the name of Ed Preston, Captain Ed Preston, at Fort Sam Houston. And the flight surgeon was a lieutenant colonel, and I'm afraid I don't remember his name, but we met in the base ops. Everyone had told me, "Oh, God, you're in trouble. Ed Preston is a hard ass. He's not going to cut you any slack." I didn't know him very well. And so we went out, pre-flight at the aircraft, took off. We stayed in the pattern a couple times. I made normal approaches, takeoffs. And he said to me, and I was in the pilot seat, he said, "Let's go over to Martindale Airfield and do a hydraulics off." Died a little bit. I thought, oh, no. Okay. I lined up for a hydraulics off maneuver. And basically what it is that you slide a helicopter in on its skids because you can't hover without hydraulics. So it's a running maneuver like an airplane. You just skid it in. But as you take off power, the torque of the anti-torque of a rotor causes the nose to turn to the right, more to the right, more to the right. And if you can't put in adequate left pedal to bring the nose around, it's not a maneuver you can complete. And I thought, I began to maneuver. The nose began turning to the right. I couldn't push any harder, a little more to the right. And I was just that close to saying to Captain Preston, "Sir, you have the aircraft," and giving the controls up. And at the very moment I was about to say that, I felt the nose begin to move just a little bit to the left. I felt the pedal move a little bit. I kept the controls. I flew the aircraft in down to the ground and skidded it in. And after we came to a stop, I looked over at him because I figured he was going to say, had to help you there, didn't I, Lieutenant? And he didn't say a word. He said, okay, put the hydraulics back on, and he said, let's go back to heliport. I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what's going on here, but I knew that I had failed that mission, or that particular maneuver. Went back, we landed. He said, Doc and I'll be upstairs in the ops. You shut her down, come on up. The crew chief who was with the aircraft, could sense my trepidation. I might even have been crying for all I know. And I shut the aircraft down and went upstairs. And lo and behold, old Ed Preston shook my hand and says, you return to flight status, but you have to fly dual pilot for 2 years. He knew that I needed that help. And I thought to myself, here's a case where a guy that I didn't know at all took a chance on me. As a result, I stayed in the Army. I flew helicopters, and I did a 28-year career. And I flew probably 2,000 or 3,000 hours of flight time since that moment. And he didn't have to do that. What a nice gesture, and what a nice, he changed my life. And I always love to tell that story. I had the pleasure to share that story with his son when Ed passed away.